Hi everyone. So in the series of big data lectures, today we will be seeing the machine learning fundamentals, that is the bias and the variance. So bias and variance, these two properties plays a very important role in machine learning algorithm. So we will see what is bias and what is variance in brief. So in statistical and machine learning, the bias variance trade-off is a property of a set of predictive models whereby models with the lower bias in the parameter estimation have a higher variance of a parameter estimates across samples and vice versa. So lower bias has a higher variance and higher bias has a lower variance. So what is bias, what is variance, we will see in brief. So bias is the difference between the average prediction of our model and the correct value which we want to predict or which we are trying to predict. So it is one type of error that is caused or erroneous assumptions in the learning algorithm. So model with the high bias pays a little attention towards the training data and oversimplifies the model. So it will lead to the high error on a training and test data set. So what is basically bias? How far the data that we are predicted differs from the actual value. It is denoted by the bias. So the error bias is known as the how there is a difference between the prediction rate of the actual and the predicted values. So if the average predictor values are far off, then the bias is high. Okay, so when a model has a high bias, then it implies that the model is too simple, since the values are too far away from the actual value. So it is too simple and it is not capturing the complexity of the data, or it is not capturing the pattern or relationship among the data. So underfitting is caused because of high bias. So high bias cause underfitting of data, that is, it is difficult to understand the complexity of the data. Next is the variance. So here it is a given the difference between the higher and bias and variance. So as I told you before, the difference between the expected prediction of the model and the correct value is known as bias, and how the prediction for a given point vary between a different realization of model is known as variance. So we will see in brief. So model with low bias and high variance will call over fitting of data, whereas with high bias and bias and low variance will cause underfitting of the data, whereas low bias and low variance will perfectly fit the model with the data. So first we'll see the data, so it will be understanding for variance, so it will be easy for you to understand what is variance. Okay, so variance is the variability of a model prediction for a given data point or a value, which tells us the spread of the data, how the data is spread among the data set. Okay, so model with high variance pays a lot of attention to training data and does not generalize on the data which hasn't seen before. So model with the high variance, it will not see the data which we haven't seen before, which we haven't used before, and it will pay a lot of attention on training data rather than on the testing data. So testing, for it is difficult to analyze the model with high variance for a test data set, not for a training data set. Okay, so the variance is an error from sensitivity to small fluctuations in the data training data set. So high variance can cause an algorithm to model the random noise in the training data rather than the intended output. So it will cause overfitting. High variance will cause overfitting of the data. So it will create a noise in the training data set, so it is difficult to analyze the data set. Okay, so variance will tell us how the data is spread or scattered from the actual values. So how the predicted values are differing, or how the predicted values are scattered from the actual data set. As a result, such models perform very well on training data but not on the testing data, so the error rate on testing data is high. So what is the basic difference? In bias, it will tell how far the values are from the actual values, and here how the data is scattered from the actual value. So high variance, as I told you before, it will cause overfitting. High bias, it will call underfitting, and low bias and variance will cause a good balance among the algorithm. Okay, since in high bias the actual predicted data is far from the actual data, how far it is, it will denoted by the bias, so it will cause underfitting. Whereas in variance, how the predicted data is spread, then the actual data can be explained by the variance, so it will cause a overfitting. So So I hope you are pretty much aware about what is bias, what is variance, and what are the things that cause overfitting, underfitting, and what will cause a good balance among the data set. Okay, with these two properties. So in each algorithm, if the predicted value is far, then we will get a bias error, or we will get a variance error. So if the bias is high, then the variance is low, and vice versa. Okay, so I hope you are aware with the bias and variance. So these two properties plays an important role in statistical and machine learning algorithm. Thank you for watching the video, guys. Have a nice day.